Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell you scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse wherever you stream podcasts. Just be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. Important note: sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. The early 1940s was a time of collective, worldwide tension and anxiety. Entire continents were embroiled in the thick of World War II, with the Allied forces fighting and pushing back against the Axis powers. Great Britain, especially, was battered and bruised. Cities were bombed, families were torn apart, and trust was in short supply. And while war waged on a national and global scale, towns and neighborhoods did their best to thrive amidst the chaos. But in April 1943, in an expansive wooded area known as Hagley Wood, in the Worcestershire countryside, 4 teenage boys made a gruesome discovery in a wych elm while poaching. Unbeknownst to them, their discovery would lead to an enduring mystery that today, over 80 years later, remains unsolved. In this episode of The Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the strange and scary mystery of Bella and the wych elm. What did the 4 local teenagers discover in an ancient wych elm in Hagley Wood? I'll share the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to The Red Treehouse. On April 18, 1943, 4 teenage boys, Tom Willits, Bob Farmer, Harry Allen, and Fred Payne, snuck into Hagley Wood, in part to get away from the monotony of the day. With Britain fighting a war, their lives were marked by food rations, blackouts, and the constant threat of attack. For the boys, the woods represented a certain freedom, even if only for a short time. A place where they could play, create their own rules, and break a few others. That day, the boys slipped away to Hagley Wood to participate in bird nesting, which is, quote, the illegal theft of eggs, chicks, or adult birds from their nests, end quote. The activity itself was simple. Climb to the taller branches in the trees and search for nests or eggs. Except bird nesting, while not considered illegal at the time, was largely frowned upon. And as important, there was an inherent risk of bodily injury when participating. Weak branches could snap, which, depending on their height, could have potentially disastrous results. That day, the 4 boys went a bit further than normal, cutting through thick brush, trying to find paths that were largely untread. It had rained some time before, so the area smelled of wet dirt and soggy leaves. And as the boys pressed further, the gnarled branches and roots gave way to an unusual tree, a wych elm, a large sprawling tree that can grow to heights of 130 feet, and whose crown spreads out the further up you go. But this wych elm was unusual, because it had a hollow cavity in the middle of it. Seeing this, the boys believed it would be a good spot to search for birds' nests, and moved closer. Bob Farmer climbed the branches until he was leaning over the dark, hollow trunk. Looking in, he noticed something unusual, and used a thick branch to move it around. What he saw startled him. It was a skull, possibly that of a large animal. Seeking to get a better look, he pushed forward. And to his horror, he saw that the skull had hair and teeth, and it was unmistakably human. The boys' initial excitement was immediately replaced with panic as they rushed away from the Wych Elm. Something dark had happened there, and they were not sure what to do or who to tell. The boys made a pact, no doubt built on fear of what they'd discovered and worry about how they discovered it, and they agreed to keep the secret to themselves. They wanted to avoid anything that invited scrutiny into their activities that led to the discovery, and for possibly disturbing what might actually have been a crime scene. Upon returning home, the boys enacted their plan of secrecy, at least initially. Tom Willits, who was overcome by worry, told his parents what they'd found earlier that day. There's something interesting. In a sense, these 4 teenage boys lost their youthful innocence that day. They initially set out on an adventure that could get them into small trouble, only to discover something horrifying and beyond their comprehension. After informing his parents of their gruesome discovery, they called the police, who immediately went to Hagley Wood to investigate. When authorities returned to Hagley Wood, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably from when the boys were there earlier. Gone was the air of excitement and risk, replaced by solemnity and concern. Investigators moved through the area carefully, scouring for clues, fully aware that something horrible lay just beyond their line of sight, and that the Wych Elm would reveal secrets that had up to this point been concealed. When they reached the Wych Elm, authorities examined it carefully, and though hollowed-out trees were common, especially in older wooded areas, it was unusual for the hollowed area to be large enough to place a human body. This Wych Elm was even more unusual in that it had split vertically, creating a hole just wide enough to carefully hold an adult human. From the outside, it looked unremarkable, but when investigators looked down, they realized something much darker had occurred. The skull the boys found was only a small part of what would become a much larger mystery. Authorities quickly discovered the remains were likely the result of someone placing the body intentionally in the Wych Elm, effectively ruling out an accidental trapping. Beneath the skull, which rested near the opening of the hollow, were the torso and limbs. Something interesting. A question that immediately entered my mind was, how did they know so quickly that the body was intentionally placed in the hollow and not an accident? According to one article, an accident would have left signs of struggle or collapse inconsistent with the body's final positioning. Except there was nothing surrounding the body, or on the body itself, to suggest an accident. Someone had placed the body in the Wych Elm, forcing it into a small, confined space, with the intention of hiding it. As the remains were carefully removed from the Wych Elm, small personal items emerged, giving investigators their first real clues as to the possible identity of the victim. A piece of taffeta fabric and shoe revealed the remains likely belonged to a woman. They also found a gold wedding ring, and it was this discovery that changed the tone of the investigation, because to someone, the woman was not nameless and unknown. While alive, she had been married. She may have even had a family, and it was possible that her husband was still waiting for her to return safely. As investigators continued scouring the area for more evidence, they found something truly unsettling: a severed human hand. For a moment, authorities were concerned it belonged to a second victim, possibly buried or concealed somewhere in the area. But further examination determined it belonged to the woman found in the Wych Elm, though how her hand became separated from the body remained unanswered. The location of the hand, found a short distance from the body, suggested intent. It appeared to have been purposely concealed, though investigators were unsure as to why. And with this grim discovery, investigators became convinced they were dealing with a homicide, which led to a series of startling and horrifying realizations. Someone killed and mutilated the unknown woman. The killer then scouted the area, chose this specific Wych Elm, disposed of the body, and simply walked away, effectively erasing the woman from history. And the Wych Elm, which to that point had been an everyday part of life, became a symbol of a real-life horror from whose depths an unknown woman cried out silently for justice. And despite investigators' diligence and hard work, the mystery was only going to deepen. We'll continue right after this quick ad break. After the remains were removed from the Wych Elm, they were transferred from Hagley Wood to the coroner's office, where they were examined carefully by Dr. James Webster. It's important to note that unlike today, forensic science was in its infancy, and thus limited. All investigators had to go on was the evidence collected at the crime scene, the Wych Elm, and the remains of the unknown woman, and it fell on pathologist James Webster to put the pieces together and figure it out. Based on his examination of the pelvis and skull, Dr. Webster determined conclusively that the remains were female. Measurements of the skeleton suggested the woman was approximately 5 feet tall, and bone density indicated she was likely somewhere between 25 and 35 years old. The woman's teeth offered additional clues. At some point, she'd received dental care, as there were several fillings. Something interesting. At first glance, the presence of dental fillings may seem insignificant, but considering the era, professional dental work indicated the woman likely did not come from poverty. Whoever she was, she had some access to medical and dental care. Despite this, Dr. Webster also discovered the woman had signs of tooth decay that had gone untreated, possibly because of the war. Determining the cause of death was more difficult than expected. Because the body was skeletal, making a conclusive determination was near impossible. Soft tissue, muscle, and flesh had already decomposed, leaving few, if any, signs of physical trauma. Her bones did not show breaks or fractures, which effectively ruled out blunt force trauma. There were no bullet holes, knife marks, or puncture marks, leaving Dr. Webster to speculate the woman likely died of suffocation. He found a piece of taffeta in her mouth. With several questions answered, focus shifted to the Wych Elm. Dr. Webster determined that while the opening was large enough to fit a body inside, it had to have been placed while the woman was either still alive or immediately after death, as it would have been impossible for her to have been placed once rigor mortis set in. As important, the vertical position of the body and narrow opening of the hollow made escape nearly impossible. This, coupled with the piece of cloth found in the woman's mouth, painted a horrifying picture. If the woman was alive when she was placed in the Wych Elm, death likely was not instantaneous. Rather, it would have been a prolonged, slow process marked by disorientation, fear, and a desperate fight for air. If the woman was placed in the Wych Elm immediately after death, it points to a killer who was resolute in their actions. Either way, the conclusions are grim and horrific. With the woman's cause of death nearly conclusive, Dr. Webster then attempted to determine the time of death. How long had the woman been in the Wych Elm? The surrounding crime scene, the growth of the tree itself, and the condition of the woman's bones allowed Dr. Webster to place her death at approximately 18 months before she was discovered, with the possibility that she had been there longer. One detail that complicated matters significantly was the severed hand. It was widely believed it belonged to the woman, but with a lack of DNA testing, it made it nearly impossible to conclude definitively. Dr. Webster noted a lack of clean cut marks on the bone, suggesting separation may have occurred post-mortem. It seemed open and shut, except, remember, it was found buried close to the body. And while Dr. Webster was able to extract valuable information, it was the absence of certain details that threatened to turn the case cold. There were no discernible injuries, no specific dental patterns, no unique personal items, and no missing persons reports from a grieving husband or family. Authorities had the remains of a woman, and Dr. Webster had worked diligently to make important determinations, but the woman remained unknown and unnamed. She could be studied and examined, but her story could not be told. She died under tragic and horrific circumstances, but with no name. Authorities were no closer to realizing justice. In late 1943, with the case growing stagnant, a passerby in nearby Birmingham noticed a strange and cryptic message scrawled on walls, buildings, and alleyways. The lettering was crude and the message was nearly identical. Who put Lubella down the Wych Elm? Or, in some instances, who put Bella down the Wych Elm, Hagley Wood? More than an isolated act of vandalism, the repetitive graffiti was insistent, and the question all but demanded an answer. It was, after all, the question authorities had been asking since the gruesome discovery. But as important as the question was the name within it: Lubella or Bella. To that point, investigators had not released the name of the woman found in the Wych Elm because they didn't know it. Official reports referred only to an unknown, unidentified female. Yet the graffiti scrawled around the area made it clear that the woman's name was Bella, and it betrayed not just the knowledge of the woman, but possibly what happened to her as well. The appearance of the graffiti brought new concerns to authorities. Was the writer the killer, or someone who knew the killer? And if the killer, were they taunting the police? A quick side note: while researching and reading, it occurred to me that the question can be read in two distinct ways. First, as a genuine question: who put Bella in the Wych Elm? It's possible the graffiti writer, other than the woman's name, didn't have additional information as to what happened, and was simply asking what everyone was thinking. But the graffiti can also be read a second way, and given the strange circumstances, I initially read it this way: as a mockery, sort of like saying, "I know something you don't know," with the emphasis on the word who. It's as if the writer was stroking their chin while asking, "Now who could have done that?" A wry smile curling on their lips. Another interesting note: I discovered that during the war, messages were often scrawled on walls, buildings, and alleyways. The messages were often warnings, directions, and propaganda, and usually had something to do with the war effort. But this message was noticeably different, because it was personal. Despite investigators' best efforts, they were unable to gain additional evidence or eyewitness testimony surrounding the graffiti. It didn't matter. Its appearance caused a stir in Great Britain. Newspapers printed front-page stories about the newly named woman, and for the first time since her death, the woman had a presence, and her name carried significance and weight. But as to be expected, speculation about the name itself followed. Was Bella her real name, or a nickname? A shortened form of Isabella, or Belinda? Or was it symbolic, chosen because it sounded intimate and familiar? The graffiti itself was unhelpful beyond providing a name. A quick note: from this point forward, I'll refer to the woman as Bella. That the graffiti was unhelpful may actually only be partially true, because there's something else it provided: a confirmation that Bella was in fact murdered, and that the killer or killers made a conscious decision to conceal her in the Wych Elm. It also ensured authorities remained active and on the case. The question demanded an answer, or at the very least, diligence in pursuing every possible lead. On the surface, it would seem that identifying Bella should have been easier than it was. She was an adult woman who was likely married, and it's that second detail that is difficult to grasp. If she was married, remember a wedding ring was found on her remains. Where was her husband or family? The answer lies in part in the reality of war-focused Great Britain. The systems designed to track lives had fractured or in some cases completely crumbled under the pressure of the war. And in the gaps between bureaucracy and chaos, Bella simply disappeared unnoticed. By the early 1940s, Great Britain was experiencing massive stress at every level. Cities were bombarded, and those under threat of attack often evacuated at a moment's notice. Men were sent to the warfront, and women and children fled to safer areas, often outside larger cities. This displacement no doubt created chaos, and it fractured families for months or even years. Addresses changed constantly, and in many cases, people simply stopped knowing where their relatives were located. Official records suffered alongside the population. Census information and local registries were destroyed in air raids. Police stations were burned and crumbled to the ground. Paper files were lost, misfiled, or never created at all. Missing persons reports were scattered across areas and jurisdictions that did not communicate efficiently with one another. And in the case of Bella, a woman could go missing and end up murdered and placed in a wych elm, and no one would even notice she was gone in the first place. There's something else. The war may have caused people to ask fewer questions. With all the movement, it may have been assumed that a person who disappeared either moved for work, joined the war effort, or been killed. And regarding Bella's wedding ring, it's possible the marriage was hasty, or that records were incomplete or destroyed in bombings. It's also possible the marriage was more common law than fully legal. It's possible that Bella's husband may have been overseas, gone missing himself, or even been killed in action. In what may be a second tragedy, it's entirely possible that Bella's husband may never have known she was missing and murdered. There's something else we don't know about Bella: her socioeconomic status. We don't know her employment or financial situation. The dental work implied that she was not mired in poverty, but it's an implication and nothing more. If Bella were of lower financial means, working perhaps in a factory, or as a domestic worker, or even as a sex worker, her disappearance may have gone entirely unnoticed. And again, with all the chaos that existed in Great Britain in the 1940s, it would not have been difficult for anyone to disappear without notice. It is an unfortunate reality that gender roles and norms played a significant role. Women had a specific part in the workforce and family, and oftentimes their suffering went unnoticed and uncared for. They were, in many respects, invisible. And in yet another layer of tragedy, a missing woman like Bella may not have been missed, at least on a larger societal scale. It should be said that investigators' failure to identify Bella was less a failure in diligent police work, and more a commentary on the fracturing of society. In this way, Bella's story is mysterious and tragic. The war forced her to be invisible. And though she did not die in a battle, or on a beachfront, or overseas, she was a quiet casualty of war, lost to larger events outside of her control. But with all of this, we still have an unanswered question. What about the severed hand? We'll continue right after this quick ad break. As the investigation stalled, questions surrounding the mysterious severed hand came to the forefront and led to an interesting theory rooted in folklore and possibly witchcraft. In 1945, Margaret Murray, an anthropologist and archaeologist at University College in London, proposed the possibility that the severed hand may have been evidence of a ritual called the Hand of Glory. Hands have long held ritual importance across European folklore. They are tools of agency, identity, and power. Removing a hand was more than mutilation. It was akin to disarmament, a stripping away of autonomy even in death. According to legend, the Hand of Glory was the dried hand of a hanged man, a criminal, that was believed to possess supernatural properties, including the ability to render people unconscious and unlock doors. According to some, a candle was made from the fat of the hanged criminal, lit, and placed in the severed hand of glory. The placement of the candle was important, as it was secured between the middle and ring fingers of the hand, which resembled a closed fist. And the only way to put out the candle was with milk. A 1722 manuscript, the Petit Albert, describes how to create the hand of glory. Quote, "Take the right or left hand of a felon who is hanging from a gibbet beside a highway. Wrap it in part of a funeral pall, and so wrapped, squeeze it well. Then put it into an earthenware vessel with zimmel, nitre, salt, and long peppers, the whole well powdered. Leave it in this vessel for a fortnight, then take it out and expose it to full sunlight during the dog days until it becomes quite dry. If the sun is not strong enough, put it in the oven with fern and vervain. Next, make a kind of candle from the fat of a gibbeted felon, virgin wax, sesame, and pony, and use the hand of glory as a candlestick to hold this candle when lighted. And then those in every place into which you go with this baneful instrument shall remain motionless." End quote. Though the witchcraft theory may seem unusual to us, in the 1940s, it would have settled far differently. Hagley Wood had a reputation as a place best avoided after dark, and there were some who believed it was a thin boundary between the living and the dead. And the hollowed-out Wych Elm contributed to the mystique, as it was seen by some as a gateway where spirits lingered, and the natural and supernatural came together. The idea that Bella's body had been placed inside a hollow tree rather than buried in the earth struck many as significant. Burial in consecrated ground was the Christian norm. To deny someone that right suggested rejection, punishment, or ritual intent. In folk belief, trees were sometimes used to imprison restless spirits, ensuring they could not walk again. To entomb a body within wood rather than soil was symbolically to trap it. And by dividing the body through severing the hand, it was believed the soul became confused, rendering it unable to return to the body. As the witchcraft theory spread, some believed Bella may have fallen victim to a coven or been targeted as part of an occult ritual. For their part, authorities were skeptical of these claims, and it is important to note there is no evidence to corroborate this. But in the absence of concrete answers and conclusions, alternative theories flourished, and when circumstances seemed to defy the natural order of the world, supernatural explanations helped fill in the gaps. To this day, the severed hand remains a mystery, and whether it was the result of ritual intent, decomposition, or deliberate misdirection remains unsolved. Another theory that surfaced in the wake of Bella's death considered the possibility that she may have been a spy. Contextually, it made sense. In 1940s Great Britain, espionage was rooted more in reality than fiction. Newspapers reported arrests of enemy agents. Radio broadcasts warned citizens to guard their conversations. And posters reminded everyone to watch what they said and who they said it to. Some versions of the theory suggested that Bella was a German spy who was possibly parachuted into England or inserted under the guise of a civilian. Others proposed that she was an associate, courier, or romantic partner to an agent. In this story, her death was not random violence, but an execution, an actual casualty of war after her identity was uncovered. Supporters of the spy theory point to her placement in the Wych Elm as evidence. Placing a body inside a tree rather than burying it suggested urgency and discretion. A shallow grave risked discovery. But a hollow tree in a rarely visited wood offered concealment less likely to be revealed. Rumors persisted that Bella spoke with an accent, and that this somehow connected her to covert enemy agents, And still another variation of the spy theory involved a local woman who alleged, while drunk, that she knew who Bella was and how she died. According to this woman's account, Bella had been part of a spy ring and was killed when she became a liability. But this one, like so many other theories and stories, fell apart under scrutiny as it lacked corroborating evidence. Of course, historians and intelligence experts have largely dismissed the spy theory. While espionage executions did occur, they were rare on British soil and generally well documented. And the nature of Bella's death, which felt intimate, indicates her murder was likely more personal. Perhaps the most compelling of the theories involves a woman named Una Mossop, who in 1953 told police that her ex-husband, Jack Mossop, had confessed that he and another man had put a woman in a tree. According to her statement, the two men met at a pub in Hagley, and there a drunken woman asked for a ride home. En route, she threw up in the car before passing out. The two men then drove her to Hagley Wood and placed her in the hollow of the Wych Elm, quote, hoping that in the morning she would wake up and be frightened into seeing the error of her ways. End quote. Una Mossop claimed her ex-husband Jack often had a recurring nightmare of a woman staring out at him from a tree. Jack Mossop died before Bella's body was found in the Wych Elm. The veracity of Una's claim is debated, as it took her nearly 10 years to come forward with this information. In the over 80 years since Bella's death, her case remains mysterious and unsolved, despite the advancements in technology and forensic testing. As these investigative techniques developed, renewed interest sparked an intriguing possibility that we could finally learn her identity. By the late 20th century, journalists and amateur sleuths renewed interest in Hagley Wood. Some visited the site to measure the tree cavity, others to get a lay of the land. Photographs and hand-drawn sketches documented what remained of the landscape, though the Wych Elm itself had decayed entirely. Forensic scientists hoped to locate surviving bone fragments for DNA analysis. However, records indicated that some of the remains had been misplaced, discarded, or lost in storage over the years. In cases like this, even the most advanced technology is powerless without physical evidence. Those fragments that did survive offered limited results, leaving us with questions that may never be answered. Nearly 83 years have passed since Bella's body was discovered in the hollow of the Wych Elm. And in some ways, she stands as a voice for the voiceless. She represents more than an unidentified murder victim, and she points to the erasure of vulnerable women whose lives have been marginalized, cast aside, and tragically discarded by circumstance and society. That we don't know for sure who Bella was highlights the invisibility of so many women who pass through life with little to no consideration. We don't know her vocation, family history, or anything about her personal life. It's an anonymity which stands as an indictment against a society that values women only insofar as they provide a service. In death, Bella was unknowable. In discovery, she became visible but unknown. The Wych Elm, which held her body for almost 2 years, kept its secret closely guarded, but in the end, it did not erase her entirely. If Bella's story tells us anything, it's how communities and systems can fail vulnerable individuals. She is as much a victim of a careless, inattentive society that didn't blink when she went missing, as she is the murderer who snuffed out her life, whether intentional or not. In this way, Bella is both a ghost and a mirror. Her tragedy and memory haunt the landscape of Hagley Wood, compelling those who encounter her story to reckon with what it means to be forgotten. Her anonymity makes her universal, allowing her to represent not only herself, but all those whose lives have been erased by circumstance, violence, or indifference. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with this lingering question: who put Bella in the Wych Elm? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.